Hey! I start a new format with this video. It's called Mystery Mix. Here in this video you will stories about mystery. They are 3 different stories. I hope you like it. So I will make more of them. Which urban legends inspired Candyman? The movie sequel is proving to be a hit, but just where did the ideas explored in the film actually originate? Joe Stubbersfield, a lecturer in psychology at the University of Winchester, takes a look at the real-world urban legends and stories that have contributed to the latest entry in the Candyman franchise. After a long absence, Candyman has returned to cinemas. Directed by Nia DaCosta, Candyman is a sequel to the 1992 original, which had moved Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden, from a Liverpool council estate to the housing projects of Chicago. Just like Barker's story, both the Candyman films do an excellent job of blending together real urban legends to create compelling new narratives. As a character, the Candyman mixes Bloody Mary, a murderous ghost summoned by saying a phrase a certain number of times in a mirror, and the Hook, a hook-handed murderer, with classic horror elements from Dracula. In doing so, he has become a horror icon in its own right. The films also make references to widespread and culturally influential urban legends such as the razor blade in the candy and the castrated boy, a story with origins in ancient Rome. In fact, the original film did this so well that Candyman has become an urban legend of his own. In researching contemporary versions of Bloody Mary, I came across more than one featuring the Candyman. People perhaps don't fear Freddy or Jason like they do Candyman, because Candyman can come into your home if summoned. Bloody Mary vs. Candyman. The original film presents a single origin for the Candyman. He is the free son of an enslaved black man who was horribly maimed and murdered by a white mob in the late 19th century for his relationship with the daughter of a wealthy white man, a backstory created by Candyman actor Tony Todd. The new film presents multiple versions of his legend, the most prominent of which is one where he is a man murdered by police after being falsely suspected of putting a razor blade in candy given to a white child. The events of the first film are, inaccurately, retold by one character as another version of the legend, while depicted on screen with striking shadow puppetry by Emmanuel Cinema. The presence of multiple versions of the story is characteristic of urban legends. There is no one true version of Bloody Mary, for example. It varies across different places, populations and times. A key interest for me in my research is how this occurs and why some versions might be more widespread than others. The Bloody Mary legends commonly involve a young woman saying a phrase multiple times in front of a mirror, which summons the ghost who then inflicts horrible violence upon her. With likely origins in older Halloween-related mirror divination rituals, Bloody Mary legends are found internationally. She also has her own films, although they're not quite as successful as Candyman. In her origin tale she is often depicted as a victim of gender-based violence. For instance, in one she is the ghost of a beautiful woman who bled to death after having her face slashed, while in another she is the mother of a murdered baby. Similarly, in the multiple versions of the Candyman legend presented in the new film, he is shown as the victim of racially motivated violence repeating across history. Versions of Bloody Mary have also been adapted to better fit a particular location or population. In Tennessee, the legend might feature the Bell Witch, a figure from local folklore. In the Latin world, it might feature La Llorona, the weeping woman of Hispanic folklore. Both are folkloric figures who predate any recorded version of Bloody Mary but have merged with the legend to appeal to local fears. What the brain wants. But if local adaptations explain why we find different versions of urban legends, it doesn't really account for why some versions are more widespread than others. The reason for this is that our brains tend to pay attention to and remember certain types of information. Fictional narratives tend to have a lasting impact when they contain social information, information about the interactions and actions of other people and groups, and survival information, information about potential threats or hazards in our environment. Our brains also tend to enjoy and remember content that evokes strong emotions, such as disgust. Enduring legends tends to do this well, and our brains can't get enough of it. This may be the product of how our minds evolved to keep track of social relationships, and to notice and remember threats in our environment. Candyman appeals strongly to these predispositions. The threat is clear: you'll say his name 5 times in front of a mirror and you die horribly. The invitation to say his name, which appears in the advertising for the new film, provokes our morbid curiosity about this potential threat, heightening this appeal further. At the same time, it's a horror film, so we expect to feel fear and maybe disgust. Candyman also includes non-supernatural social threats, more grounded in the realities of our environment. My research into these biases used Chinese whispers experiments to mimic how stories are transmitted by word of mouth. I found that social information is more potent than survival information in the transmission of urban legends. Archaeologists claim discovery of Trojan horse. Pieces of wood allegedly belonging to the iconic wooden horse have been reportedly discovered in Greece. The story goes that during the Trojan War, the ancient Greeks, at the behest of Odysseus, built a giant wooden horse large enough for a small force of soldiers to hide inside. The Greek forces then pretended to retreat so that the Trojans, who were stationed within the city of Troy, could emerge from the gates and take possession of the horse as a war trophy. It was all an elaborate truce, however, as the Greek soldiers later emerged from the horse and opened the gates from the inside, allowing the rest of the Greek army to enter and take the city. The final resting place of the wooden horse, if it actually existed, has always remained something of a mystery, but now archaeologists from Turkey claim that they may have found pieces of wood from the structure in the hills of Hisarlik at the site of the historic city. The discovery consists of dozens of planks measuring up to 15 meters in length and which, according to the team, were assembled in such a way so as to suggest that they were part of the horse. Excavation leaders Christine Morris and Chris Wilson of Boston University maintain that they have a high level of confidence that the find is linked to the horse. The carbon dating tests and other analysis have all suggested that the wooden pieces and other artifacts date from the 12th or 11th centuries B.C., said Morris. This matches the dates cited for the Trojan War. NDA's my life flashed before my eyes. Why do some people report seeing their life flashing before their eyes during a near-death experience? Steve Taylor, a senior lecturer in psychology at Leeds Beckett University, investigates this perplexing phenomenon. At the age of 16, when Tony Coffey was an apprentice builder living in Nottingham, he fell from the 3rd story of a building. Time seemed to slow down massively, and he saw a complex series of images flash before his eyes. As he described it, in my mind's eye I saw many, many things. Children that I hadn't even had yet, friends that I had never seen but are now my friends. The thing that really stuck in my mind was playing an instrument. Then Tony landed on his head and lost consciousness. When he came to at the hospital, he felt like a different person and didn't want to return to his previous life. Over the following weeks, the images kept flashing back into his mind. He felt that he was being shown something and that the images represented his future. Later, Tony saw a picture of a saxophone and recognized it as the instrument he'd seen himself playing. He used his compensation money from the accident to buy one. Now, Tony Coffey is one of the UK's most successful jazz musicians, having won the BBC Jazz Awards twice, in 2005 and 2008. Though Tony's belief that he saw into his future is uncommon, it's by no means uncommon for people to report witnessing multiple scenes from their past during split-second emergency situations. After all, this is where the phrase "my life flashed before my eyes" comes from. But what explains this phenomenon? Psychologists have proposed a number of explanations, but I'd argue the key to understanding Tony's experience lies in a different interpretation of time itself. When life flashes before our eyes. The experience of life flashing before one's eyes has been reported for well over a century. In 1892, a Swiss geologist named Albert Heim fell from a precipice while mountain climbing. In his account of the fall, he wrote, "It was as if on a distant stage, my whole past life was playing itself out in numerous scenes." More recently, in July 2005, a young woman called Gil Hicks was sitting near one of the bombs that exploded on the London Underground. In the minutes after the accident, she hovered on the brink of death where, as she describes it, "my life was flashing before my eyes, flickering through every scene, every happy and sad moment, everything I have ever done, said, experienced." In some cases, people don't see a review of their whole lives, but a series of past experiences and events that have special significance to them. Explaining life reviews. Perhaps surprisingly, given how common it is, the life review experience has been studied very little. A handful of theories have been put forward, but they're understandably tentative and rather vague. For example, a group of Israeli researchers suggested in 2017 that our life events may exist as a continuum in our minds, and may come to the forefront in extreme conditions of psychological and physiological stress. Another theory is that, when we're close to death, our memories suddenly unload themselves, like the contents of a skip being dumped. This could be related to cortical disinhibition, a breaking down of the normal regulatory processes of the brain, in highly stressful or dangerous situations, causing a cascade of mental impressions. But the life review is usually reported as a serene and ordered experience, completely unlike the kind of chaotic cascade of experiences associated with cortical disinhibition. And none of these theories explain how it's possible for such a vast amount of information, in many cases, all the events of a person's life, to manifest themselves in a period of a few seconds, and often far less. Thinking in spatial time. An alternative explanation is to think of time in a spatial sense. Our common sense view of time is as an arrow that moves from the past through the present towards the future, in which we only have direct access to the present. But modern physics has cast doubt on this simple linear view of time. Indeed, since Einstein's theory of relativity, some physicists have adopted a spatial view of time. They argue we live in a static block universe in which time is spread out in a kind of panorama where the past, the present and the future coexist simultaneously. The modern physicist Carlo Rovelli, author of the best-selling The Order of Time, also holds the view that linear time doesn't exist as a universal fact. This idea reflects the view of the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who argued that time is not an objectively real phenomenon, but a construct of the human mind. This could explain why some people are able to review the events of their whole lives in an instant. A good deal of previous research, including my own, has suggested that our normal perception of time is simply a product of our normal state of consciousness. In many altered states of consciousness, time slows down so dramatically that seconds seem to stretch out into minutes. This is a common feature of emergency situations, as well as states of deep meditation, experiences on psychedelic drugs and when athletes are in the zone. The limits of understanding. But what about Tony Coffey's apparent visions of his future? Did he really glimpse scenes from his future life? Did he see himself playing the saxophone because somehow his future as a musician was already established? There are obviously some mundane interpretations of Tony's experience. Perhaps, for instance, he became a saxophone player simply because he saw himself playing it in his vision. But I don't think it's impossible that Tony did glimpse future events. If time really does exist in a spatial sense, and if it's true that time is a construct of the human mind, then perhaps in some way future events may already be present, just as past events are still present. Admittedly, this is very difficult to make sense of. But why should everything make sense to us? As I have suggested in a recent book, there must be some aspects of reality that are beyond our comprehension. After all, we're just animals, with a limited awareness of reality. And perhaps more than any other phenomenon, this is especially true of time.